He went straight to the HOA website, found the contact information, and drafted a detailed email. He attached the pictures, outlined the selective enforcement of the rules, and requested a formal review of Barbara Whitman's conduct. He hit send, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. Finally, some action. The response came quickly, an automated reply confirming receipt of his complaint. He knew it would take time, but he felt a sense of relief, like he'd finally thrown a punch. He was wrong. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. Malik tore it open, expecting a response to his complaint. Instead, he found an eviction notice. Violation of HOA bylaws, repeated infractions, failure to maintain property standards. The letter listed every single notice he'd received, highlighting the egregious nature of his offences. It concluded with a demand to vacate the property within 30 days. Malik's blood ran cold. Eviction. Over trash cans and a porch light, this was beyond harassment. This was a declaration of war. He called the HOA office, but no one answered. He tried Barbara's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He even drove to her house, but no one came to the door. He knew he needed legal help, but it was late, and he was seething. He paced his living room, the eviction notice crumpled in his hand. He thought about his dream of owning this house, the years of work it took to get here. He wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA president take it away. The next morning, Malik found a local attorney specializing in property disputes. He laid out the situation, showing her the stack of notices and the eviction letter. The attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her late 30s, listened intently, her expression growing increasingly incredulous. "This is outrageous," she said, shaking her head. "Selective enforcement, harassment, and now an illegal eviction attempt. This is clearly personal." "That's what I thought," Malik replied. "But I need to know what I can do." "We're going to fight this," she said, her voice firm. "We'll file a restraining order to stop the eviction, and we'll demand a full investigation into the HOA's practices. We'll also file a complaint with the state's Consumer Protection Agency. This isn't just about your house. It's about stopping this kind of abuse of power." Malik felt a surge of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. He was going to make Barbara Whitman regret ever targeting him. That afternoon, Malik went to the local courthouse and filed for the restraining order. As he walked out, he noticed a familiar figure standing across the street. Barbara Whitman. She was watching him, her expression a mix of anger and something else, something that looked like fear. He met her gaze, a cold smile spreading across his face. "It's just beginning, Barbara," he said, his voice low. "You have no idea what you've started." Barbara's face flushed, but she didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, her steps quickening. Malik watched her go, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. He knew this was going to be a long and messy battle, but he was ready. He was ready to fight for his home, for his peace, and for justice. "We appreciate your concerns, but the HOA board determines which issues require action. We've reviewed your complaints, and while some are valid, they aren't considered priority violations at this time." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Priority violations? So, some rules matter more than others?" Barbara stepped forward, her voice sharp. "We're not here to debate policy, Mr. Patterson. We're here to address your ongoing violations, your porch furniture, your lawn, the unauthorized vehicles." "Unauthorized vehicles?" Malik interrupted, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You mean my friends? My family?" Stephen Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "We've received complaints about excessive traffic at your residence." "Complaints from who?" Malik asked, his gaze fixed on Barbara. "You?" Barbara's face flushed. "That's irrelevant. The point is, you're not complying with the HOA guidelines." "And you are?" Malik countered, gesturing toward the street. "Because I have pictures of dozens of homes in this neighborhood that are in clear violation of the same rules you're trying to enforce on me." Stephen Reynolds sighed. "Mr. Patterson, we're trying to be reasonable. We understand you're new to the neighborhood, but we expect you to abide by the rules." "Reasonable?" Malik scoffed. "You're harassing me. You're selectively enforcing rules. You're trying to evict me over trash cans and porch furniture. That's not reasonable. That's personal." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "If you continue to be uncooperative, we'll have no choice but to escalate this matter further." "Escalate?" Malik repeated, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Go ahead. I've already contacted my attorney. I've filed a restraining order to stop your illegal eviction attempt, and I've filed a complaint with the state's Consumer Protection Agency. I'm not going anywhere, Barbara, and I'm not going to stop until you and your little power trip are over." Barbara's face turned a shade of crimson. Stephen Reynolds looked visibly uncomfortable, glancing back and forth between them. "You think you can intimidate me?" Malik continued, his voice low and steady. "You think you can push me out of my own home? You're wrong. I'm not afraid of you, Barbara, and I'm not afraid of your HOA. You want a fight? You've got one." He turned and walked toward his house, leaving Barbara and Stephen standing in the driveway, their expressions a mix of anger and disbelief. He knew he had crossed a line, but he didn't care. He was done playing nice. He was done being intimidated. He was going to fight for his home, for his peace, and for his dignity. Later that evening, Malik received a call from his attorney. "Malik, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I just received a copy of the HOA's bylaws and meeting minutes. They've been selectively enforcing rules for years, targeting anyone they deem undesirable. And guess what? They've been doing it without proper authorization from the board." "What does that mean?" Malik asked. "It means they've been operating outside of their authority," she explained. "It means their actions are illegal. It means we have them right where we want them." Malik smiled. "Good, because I'm just getting started." He knew that Barbara Whitman and the Brentwood Estates HOA were about to learn that they had picked the wrong fight, and he was going to make sure they paid for it. "What is the meaning of this?" Barbara demanded, her voice tight. "These are irrelevant." "Irrelevant?" Malik chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. "Hardly. You see, Barbara, I've been doing some digging. I've been looking into the Brentwood Estates HOA, its bylaws, its practices, and its leadership." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room, and what I found was enlightening. He picked up a thick folder, its contents bulging. "For starters, I found evidence of selective enforcement of HOA rules, targeting specific homeowners based on personal biases. I found records of unauthorized fines, illegal eviction attempts, and fabricated complaints." He opened the folder, revealing stacks of documents. "I have sworn affidavits from former homeowners detailing years of harassment and intimidation. I have emails, text messages, and recorded phone conversations, all proving a pattern of abuse of power." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Barbara's face was flushed, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on Malik. "But that's not all," Malik continued, his voice rising. "I also found something interesting about the HOA's finances, specifically the discrepancies in the budget reports, the unexplained expenditures, and the missing funds." He held up a spreadsheet. "According to these records, over the past 3 years, nearly $50,000 has been unaccounted for. And guess whose name keeps popping up on the transactions?" He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Barbara Whitman." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, and shocked expressions filled the space. Barbara's face had turned ashen. "These documents," Malik said, gesturing to the stack on the table, "will be handed over to the Davidson County District Attorney's Office, along with my formal complaint. I'm also filing a civil lawsuit against the Brentwood Estates HOA and Barbara Whitman personally for harassment, defamation, and abuse of power." He turned to the other board members. "I suggest you distance yourselves from this mess, because if you don't, you'll be implicated as well." He turned back to Barbara, his eyes cold. As for you, Barbara, your little power trip is over. You tried to intimidate me to push me out of my own home. You underestimated me. You thought I was just some guy who would roll over and take it. But I'm not. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done. He picked up the deeds to Barbara's properties. And just so we're clear, he said, sliding the deeds across the table, these are yours. I bought them, cash. I'm not going to live in them. I am, however, going to rent them out. And I'm going to rent them to people that you would hate to have living next door, people that break every single one of your rules. He gave her a chilling smile. Consider it a neighborhood improvement. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Barbara and the stunned board members in his wake. He knew this was just the beginning, but he also knew he had won. He had exposed Barbara's corruption, and he had reclaimed his peace. And he had sent a clear message: don't mess with Malik Patterson. She tried to evict the man who owns her house? And the missing funds? Another voice added, louder this time. That's not right. Stephen Reynolds, the vice president, cleared his throat, his face flushed. We need to address these allegations, he said, looking at the remaining board members. We can't ignore this. The murmurs grew louder, turning into open discussion. People were finally speaking up, their voices filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Malik watched, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over him. He had exposed Barbara, and now the community was turning against her. He stood, gathering his documents. I'll be sending a formal complaint and all the evidence to the district attorney's office, he said, his voice clear and firm. I suggest you all do the same. Wallace, and if anyone wants to talk about their experiences with the HOA, my attorney's office is open. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the board members and homeowners to grapple with the fallout. As he walked down the hallway, he felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. He knew Barbara wouldn't give up easily. The next day, Malik received a call from his attorney. Malik, you need to see this, she said, her voice urgent. Someone filed a restraining order against you. They're claiming you're harassing Barbara Whitman. Malik's blood ran cold. He knew exactly who was behind it. What are the grounds? He asked. They're claiming you've been intimidating her, threatening her, and invading her privacy, she said. They even have a few witnesses who claim they saw you following her. Malik scoffed. That's ridiculous. I haven't done any of that. I know, she said, but we need to address this immediately. They're trying to turn the tables, to paint you as the aggressor. Malik knew what Barbara was doing. She was trying to salvage what was left of her reputation, to portray herself as the victim. He wasn't going to let her get away with it. He went straight to the courthouse, his attorney by his side. They presented their evidence, the documents, the emails, the witness statements from other homeowners. They showed how Barbara had abused her power, how she had selectively enforced rules, how she had tried to evict him illegally. The judge listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grim. This is a clear case of abuse of power, she said, her voice firm. I'm denying the restraining order against Mr. Patterson, and I'm ordering a full investigation into the Brentwood Estates HOA and Barbara Whitman's conduct. Malik felt a surge of triumph. He had won again, but he knew this wasn't over. Barbara was cornered, and she was dangerous. That evening, as Malik sat on his porch, sipping a beer, he saw a car pull up to the curb. It was Barbara's car. She stepped out, her face pale, her eyes filled with a desperate intensity. Malik, she said, her voice trembling, we need to talk. Malik stood, his expression cold. We have nothing to talk about, Barbara. Please, she said, her voice pleading. Just listen to me. I made a mistake. I was wrong. I'll resign from the HOA. I'll pay the fines. Just please, leave me alone. Malik looked at her, his eyes unwavering. You think you can just apologize and everything will be fine? He asked. You tried to destroy my life, Barbara. You tried to take my home. You're going to face the consequences." Barbara's face crumpled. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm begging you." Malik turned and walked toward his house. "It's too late, Barbara," he said, his voice low. "You should have thought about that before you started this." He closed the door, leaving Barbara standing on the curb, her face buried in her hands. He knew she was desperate, but he also knew he couldn't forgive her. She had crossed a line, and she had to pay for it. He was done being the victim. He was going to make sure she faced justice. Malik watched them walk away, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. He wasn't vindictive, but he believed in justice. Barbara had tried to take his home, his peace, and his dignity. She had underestimated him, and she had paid the price. He went inside, poured himself a glass of iced tea, and sat on his porch watching the sunset. He thought about the past few weeks, the tension, the harassment, the legal battles. He had fought for his home, and he had won. A few days later, Malik received a call from Richard Whitman. They had agreed to his price, albeit reluctantly. The sale went through smoothly, and Malik found himself the owner of 2 additional properties in Brentwood Estates. He decided to rent them out, as he had mentioned, but he didn't fill them with disruptive tenants. Instead, he carefully screened applicants, choosing families and individuals who would contribute to the neighborhood's peace and stability. He also made sure to attend the next HOA meeting, where he addressed the remaining board members and homeowners. He outlined his vision for a more transparent and equitable HOA, one that focused on community building rather than petty power struggles. He offered to help them revise the bylaws to ensure that rules were enforced fairly and consistently. Some were hesitant, still wary of his presence, but others were grateful, relieved to have someone willing to take a stand against the old regime. Malik wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in building a better community. As the months passed, Brentwood Estates began to change. The atmosphere was lighter, more welcoming. People started to talk to each other, to organize neighborhood events, to look out for one another. The tension that had once permeated the air had dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. Malik found himself enjoying his new home. He made friends with his neighbors, joined the local book club, and even volunteered at the community garden. He had found the peace he had been searching for, not just in his house, but in his neighborhood. One evening, as he sat on his porch, watching the fireflies flicker in the twilight, he thought about Barbara Whitman. He hadn't seen her since the sale of her house, and he didn't expect to. He didn't hate her, but he didn't forgive her either. He simply acknowledged that their paths had crossed, and he had emerged stronger. He smiled, a genuine, contented smile. He had faced a nightmare, but he had turned it into a dream. He had found his place in Brentwood Estates, and he had made it his own. He had proven that even in the face of adversity, justice could prevail, and peace could be found. And that, he thought, was a victory worth celebrating. This is a great, concise, and impactful ending. It wraps up the story perfectly, emphasizing the themes of power, control, and community. Here's a slightly polished version, adding a touch more flow and emphasis. Malik let the moment sit before speaking. "Barbara," he said, her back stiffening, "next time you judge someone before knowing them," he gestured toward her house, "remember where it got you." She didn't say a word, just turned and walked away. A month later, the "For Sale" sign went up in front of 216 Oakwood Drive. Barbara had refused to buy back the house at Malik's price, and no bank would give her a loan for the amount she needed. She and Richard packed up and left in the middle of the night, moving to a smaller place across town. The neighborhood changed after that. Without Barbara in charge, the HOA actually started working the way it was supposed to, addressing real issues instead of policing nonsense. And the neighbors, some still avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their silence, but others made an effort, slowly breaking the wall they had helped Barbara build. One day, Lisa Hendricks, one of the few who had voted against Barbara, walked up Malik's driveway with a plate of cookies. "I know it's late," she said, shifting awkwardly, "but welcome to the neighborhood." Malik smiled, accepting the plate. "Took you long enough." Lisa chuckled, a little sheepish. "Yeah, it did." Malik took a bite of a cookie, sweet, a little stale, but better late than never. Some people spend their lives trying to control others. They think their power comes from rules, from status, from making others feel small. But real power, that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more. Because trust me, there's plenty more where this came from.